Hello everyone, I'm your narrator from Grave Hush, and I'm here to help you unwind tonight. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now get cozy, take a deep breath, let your body sink into the stillness. It's time to relax and let the story carry you into sleep. Our first story tonight, let's begin. And someone's paying me a lot to guard an empty field. The past 6 months had been hell. I lost my job, which made my girlfriend leave me too. For months I couldn't find anything, and when I finally did, it was just a gas station gig. A few days later, my mom died in a car accident. That broke me completely, and I got fired from the gas station too. By then, I had been unemployed for nearly half a year. I was completely broke. I had almost no savings left, and I spent the last of it on paying rent. After that, I had no idea what to do. There was no one I could borrow money from. My mom had been the only one I could turn to. My dad left us when I was a kid, and I had no idea where he even was. I absolutely had to find work, but back then unemployment was skyrocketing. Everyone was looking for a job. My situation felt hopeless. That's when I came across a listing on a job site, and it instantly caught my attention. 24/7 shift work, immediate start. The only requirement was a valid driver's license. The pay, suspiciously high. But what did I have to lose? If I didn't find a job soon, I'd end up on the street anyway. The ad only listed a phone number. Applicants were supposed to call it. I didn't overthink it, I just called. But after a minute of ringing, they hung up on me. I figured whatever. Probably 1,000 people applied anyway. Another dead end. But just as I put my phone down, I got a text from the number I'd called. It read, "We can only communicate in writing. It's more convenient for us." I didn't care. As long as they hired me, they could use smoke signals for all I cared. They asked me to briefly write who I was and why I applied, so I told them the truth. Soon enough, they replied that I was a good fit. They asked when I could start. It all felt suspicious as hell, but I didn't give a damn anymore. I had literally nothing to lose. I accepted the job. Then they texted me a GPS coordinate and told me to be there at exactly 8 a.m. the next morning. The location was a train station parking lot not far from where I lived. Two thoughts immediately crossed my mind. Either they were going to harvest my organs, or I'd just walked into some kind of pyramid scheme. Still, as sketchy as it all sounded, I was there by 8 the next morning. I had no idea what or who I was supposed to look for. That's when a pudgy, bald, middle-aged guy walked up to me. He looked like a school janitor or something. Then he said, "You Steve?" I just nodded. Yeah, I was the guy who applied for the job. The chubby man led me to the parking lot where an ancient Dodge Caravan was parked. I could barely believe my eyes when he told me this would be my work vehicle. My grandpa used to drive something like this when I was a kid. He opened the trunk and pulled out a cardboard box. He said everything I'd need was in there. Then he handed me a few papers to sign. I skimmed them quickly, just the usual stuff about labor, laws, and my contract. The bald guy wished me good luck, then handed me $1,000 in cash. I froze. Why was I being paid so much up front? He said it was a sign of trust and that I'd get the rest of my pay when I returned. If I had any questions or problems, I should text the same number I applied through. Then he gave me the keys. and just walked away. I opened the box and started loading the stuff into the car. It had everything: a security guard uniform, a flashlight, a ton of pre-packaged sandwiches, and 2 large bottles of water. There was also a small manual labeled User Manual. The first page had a short list of rules. You must wear the uniform at all times during the 24-hour shift. Your pay is only granted if you stay on site for the full 24 hours. I didn't read much more than that at first. I flipped ahead to the page that said where I was supposed to go. It was another GPS coordinate. I punched it into my phone to see where it led. It pointed to a seemingly empty field just outside of town. Weird, but if that's what they wanted, fine. I'd already been paid part of the money anyway. The drive was pretty uneventful. I punched the coordinates into my GPS. It was easy enough to follow the directions. The trip took about an hour and a half. Once I got off the highway, I passed through a small town, one of those typical quiet places. From there, it was just another 10 minutes down a narrow road, and then the GPS told me to turn onto a small dirt path leading into the woods. There were tire tracks in the soil, so clearly others had driven there before. I figured it was safe enough and drove in. The trees were dense and their branches scraped against the sides of the car as I made my way through. Then suddenly I emerged from the forest. A wide, empty lot opened up in front of me. My phone beeped. You have arrived at your destination. It really was just an empty field. No trees grew here, or maybe they'd been cleared out. The grass was dry and yellow like it hadn't rained in ages, and clearly no one had watered it either. I had no idea what I was supposed to be guarding out here in the middle of nowhere. But fine. What else did I have going on? Then I remembered the manual's note. I was only allowed to work in the provided uniform. So I got out of the car and changed. I looked like some awkward mall cop reject. Just then my phone buzzed. Another text from that same number. Welcome to the company. Good luck on your first shift. Your 24 hours have officially begun. Time passed slowly. At first I just sat in the car, unsure of what I was supposed to do. I ate one of the sandwiches. By the afternoon, I got tired of sitting and decided to take a walk around the field to see what I was even guarding. But I didn't find anything. It was just an empty lot. No fence, no buildings. The tree line roughly marked the boundary of the area. Some of the trees had signs posted on them. Private property. No trespassing. I got hungry again, so I went back to the car and ate another sandwich. Then I waited some more. That's when I remembered the manual. Maybe there was more about what I was supposed to be doing. I flipped through it and read the next set of instructions. No one is allowed on the property. If anyone enters, politely ask them to leave. No audio or video recordings may be made on the premises. Do not fall asleep during your shift. Perform your duties diligently. Do not leave the property unless specifically instructed to do so, or you will not be paid. If you find a package on the premises, place it in the trunk and bring it to the rendezvous point. That part really made me pause. What kind of package would show up here? Dropped from a plane, maybe? I started getting nervous, thinking maybe I'd gotten myself into something illegal. But then again, why would they make me sign an employment contract? The mafia doesn't really do paperwork. I laughed to myself at the idea, then flipped ahead in the manual. There were no more general instructions, so I kept reading. A few pages later, the booklet laid out a time-based schedule with specific tasks. But even the first one struck me as strange. 0045, please feed the dog. What dog? Was this some kind of cover story, like in the movies where they use code names for things? Or was there actually a dog out here somewhere? Whatever the case, I had already missed the time. I let it go. 222, please drive the metal rod into the ground at the northwest corner of the lot. Metal rod? I hadn't seen anything like that. Maybe I missed it. 430, please remove the metal rod. Place it back where you found it. 841, please politely ask the boy on the bicycle to leave. I arrived after those times, so I didn't pay attention to them. 1610, for your own safety, please remain inside the provided vehicle until 1630. That one made my stomach drop. I checked my phone. It was 4:01 p.m. I stared out the windshield, counting down the seconds in dread. 16:09:57, 16:09:58, 16:09:59, 16:10:00. And suddenly the air around me felt heavier. Still, nothing happened. The field remained exactly the same. The trees swayed gently in the breeze. It was still just a mild May Wednesday, but I didn't dare move. I stayed curled up in the car until 16:30 on the dot. The only thing I saw was a magpie taking off from the field. Nothing out of the ordinary. At 4:30, I finally got out and walked around the lot, still the same, just like when I'd arrived around 10 in the morning. I was getting seriously anxious now. What the hell was this job? It felt like some messed up game show. I half expected to find myself on YouTube the next day as the butt of some elaborate prank. I climbed back into the car and flipped open the manual again. After that, I had to know what else was in there. Among the instructions, only one remained. If you are lacking anything, please inform us via the contact number. So I decided to keep reading the rest of the day's schedule, see what I still needed to be aware of. 1800 hours. When the vehicle arrives, please indicate whether you followed today's instructions. If you did, raise your right hand high enough to be visible. If you didn't, please raise your left hand. I let out a long sigh. Another meaningless task. What vehicle? Why do I need to signal whether I follow their weird little rules? And what happens if I raise the left hand? At exactly 1800 hours, a vehicle showed up. It didn't come out onto the field. A black pickup. 2 people were inside, but they were too far to make out. I stood next to my own car, watching them, wondering when I was supposed to signal. Then the pickup gave a short honk as if to say, "We're waiting." I quickly raised my right hand high. The truck pulled forward a little, but it never came closer. It turned around at the edge of the lot, then drove right back down the narrow dirt road the same way I came in. I scratched my head, baffled. What the hell was this job? All I had to do was watch over an empty field and obey these ridiculous instructions. I laid the manual down on the car's hood again and flipped to the next task. 2233. If you see someone on the field, please politely ask them to leave. Except if it's the old man. Leave him alone. He will leave on his own by 2300. Yeah, I wasn't thrilled about this one. Chasing strangers off a dark field in the middle of the night? What the hell was going on here? The rest of my afternoon passed calmly. I sat on the field, went for a walk, or rested in the car. There was something weirdly peaceful about the place, so naturally calm. If it weren't for those absurd tasks, I might have even enjoyed it. But my stomach twisted whenever I thought about spending the entire night out here. I checked the schedule to see what else awaited me. After the 22:33 task, the next one wasn't until 0540, which simply said, "Let the deer cross the field." That finally gave me some comfort. At least it sounded normal. As evening came, the temperature started to drop, and I figured it'd be best to stay in the car. I was scrolling on my phone, well, more like browsing job listings. No matter how well they promised to pay for this, if they even paid the rest, I didn't want to do this a day longer than I had to. With no better idea, I started watching a movie on my phone. I know I broke a rule, but I ended up dozing off. Not for long, maybe half an hour, and I hope nobody had noticed if anyone was even watching me. Then I checked the time, 10:35 p.m. Shit! I had to check if someone was on the field. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped out of the car, nervous. I swept the beam across the field. Nothing. Still empty, like always. Or so I thought. A bit farther off, near the trees, someone was there. A young woman in a red dress with white spots. She was having a picnic. There was a red checkered blanket laid out, a picnic basket, a bottle of wine, and some snacks. I had zero desire to walk over. Who the hell picnics at almost 11 p.m. in the middle of nowhere? And how the hell did she get here? I swallowed hard to summon the courage. No way I was risking my payment after enduring the whole damn day. I braced myself and walked over slowly, trying to hide how freaked out I was. The woman was sitting there, cheerful and smiling with a lovely face. Struggling to open the wine, she hadn't even noticed me. "Excuse me, ma'am, I'm afraid you can't be here." "This is private property," I said politely, though my voice trembled from the nerves. "Oh my God, you scared me," she squealed. "I didn't even see you there." She seemed totally normal, like it was a sunny Saturday morning and she was just relaxing in the park. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," I repeated, still politely. "Oh, I didn't know," she said with mild surprise. "But wouldn't you like to join me for the picnic instead?" I glanced around, confused and tense. What the hell is this now? But the guide had been clear. I had to ask her to leave. So I stuck to the plan. "I'm afraid I can't, ma'am," I replied with a slightly trembling voice. "You can't picnic here. Please leave." "All right," she said softly. "But could you help me up?" She gently extended her hand for assistance. I took her small, slender hand. It was warm and soft, like she'd been lounging on a beach, not sitting in a damp forest. I helped her up and she began brushing off her dress, straightening it delicately. "Would you mind packing up the picnic basket for me?" she asked with a sweet smile. I didn't answer, just nodded anxiously. Anything to get her gone. I bent down to fold the red blanket and grab the wine bottle, and I took my eyes off her for just a second. But when I looked up, she was gone, like she'd never existed at all. I panicked. Sweat poured down my back. My throat tightened like I'd swallowed a stone. There was no sign of her, no movement, no sound. Nowhere to hide, yet she had simply vanished. Without saying a word, I walked back to the car. I got in, started it up, and turned on every light I could. I stared out the windshield, barely moving for what felt like hours, until dawn finally broke. That's when I saw a herd of deer emerging from the woods, slowly crossing the field. One of them stopped, stared at my car for a moment, then followed the rest. I was getting really tired, but there wasn't much time left in my shift. I didn't get out of the car until the sky was fully lit. There were no more tasks listed in the handbook for Thursday, so I could finally relax. I walked to the spot on the field where the woman had been picnicking the night before. But there was no trace of her. No blanket, no basket, nothing. Instead, there was a small box. A tiny wooden crate, carefully sealed with a red ribbon tied around it. 2 stickers were on the front. One read "Fragile." The other oddly said, "Do not open until 1378. I didn't even bat an eye at that. Just another strange thing in a string of strange things. I remembered the instructions, so I picked it up and placed it on the back seat of the car. I waited a few more hours. The day grew warmer. The sun lit up the entire field, peaceful and serene. It felt like I was just camping out in nature. At last, 10 o'clock came. Soon after, I received a text. "Thank you for your service. Your shift is now over. Please return to the rendezvous point." Attached was a GPS coordinate back to the train station where I'd first met the chubby man. The drive back was rough. I stopped in the small town for food and coffee to keep myself awake. I had eggs and bacon, my first hot meal after a bizarre 24 hours. It felt surprisingly good to leave that strange yet peaceful place behind. When I arrived at the station, the same man was already there, looking just as tired and dull as before. "What the hell is going on at that place?" I asked as I handed him the keys. "I don't even know where you were," he said flatly and just shrugged. "But here's your envelope. They said there's a little bonus in there since you followed all the instructions." "Who said that?" I asked immediately. "The company. I don't know, man. I just go where they tell me. They pay great, and that's all I care about." I didn't know what to say. He was just another worker like me, just in a different role. "Go home. Get some sleep," the man added as he got into his car. "If they gave you a bonus already, they'll probably call you again." And with that, he drove off. I stood there, not sure if I'd dreamed the past day or not. I went home, finally took a shower, and after more than 24 hours awake, I crashed hard. But before I slept, I opened the envelope. For one day of work, they paid me $5,000, plus the $1,000 I got up front. I think I'll go back. I took 2 days off. Finally, with that money, I paid off all my debts and could finally sleep in peace. But I still didn't have a proper job. I applied to quite a few normal positions, but it was like no one needed me anywhere. Even my neighbor lost his job. Things were rough in the city, that's for sure. The news kept saying the crisis was inevitable. Factories were shutting down. People were getting laid off. That evening, my phone buzzed again. It was that number, the familiar one. "Steve, there's another shift available tomorrow. Interested?" I hesitated. That place was strange. I was wary of it, but something about it pulled me back. That kind of money just for following some rules and paying attention to weird tasks? I said yes. Once again, I was at the train station at 8 a.m. The car showed up, same brown Dodge Caravan as last time, and the same fat guy was driving it. He looked cheerful this time, already grinning at me knowingly. "Told you you'd be back, Steve," the fat guy said with a smug grin. "Good pay, right?" I gave him an awkward smile and nodded. Same setup as before. He handed me the $1,000 up front, a cardboard box with my gear and the day's instructions. Then I took the keys and drove out of the city. The coordinates led to the same place again, through the small town, into the woods, and finally to the field. I parked in the same corner of the property where I could keep a good eye on everything. But this time I figured I'd read the manual ahead of time. Didn't want to get caught off guard like before. The handbook was identical to the one I had last time, with just one difference. Instead of Wednesday, it now said Saturday on the cover. The rules were the same as last time, but the schedule, completely different. 4:51. Do not worry about the horses, they're just grazing. You may approach them if you'd like. Missed that one again. 11:29. A bird must be seen flying high. If you don't see it, immediately text the contact number and leave the premises. 13:34. Please put on the raincoat provided in the box and do not re-enter the vehicle until the rain has stopped. When done, place the raincoat in the trunk. 15:46. Let the hikers pass. Greet them back if they greet you. 1991. Do not die. What? I froze in disbelief. What kind of time is 1991, and what the hell does do not die mean? I'd already been creeped out by this place, but no one said I could die doing this job. I still had 10 minutes left to spot the bird. I was sitting closer to the center of the field. The sun was shining down on me, soft clouds crawling across the sky. Everything felt peaceful and calm. I texted the contact number. What's 1991 supposed to mean? And what do you mean, don't die? I'll quit right now if this is some dangerous shit. They replied quickly, assuring me it was just a typo, that this job wouldn't cost me my life. Just follow the tasks and everything would be fine. I wasn't reassured, but $5,000 for a day's work, that was reassuring. So I swallowed my nerves and decided that if anything got too weird, I'd just leave. I sat in silence, listening to the wind whistle through the trees. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. I felt like I could stay here forever, if not for the bizarre tasks. I kept watching the sky, waiting for the bird. None in sight. By 11:30, still nothing. I was starting to panic. How long was I supposed to wait? I was just reaching for my phone again when I finally spotted it. A large bird was circling high above like it was waiting for something. Relief flooded through me. At least that box was checked. I had a couple of hours until the raincoat thing, so I decided to take a walk. It was nice out, and I needed to stretch my legs. The air was fresh, and I felt more prepared this time. I had snacks, drinks, even brought coffee and soda. After a while, I relieved myself behind a tree, no one around after all, then sat down to eat. At around 13:30, the sky began to darken. I'd already pulled out the bright yellow raincoat from the box and stood beside the car, waiting. At exactly 13:34, rain began to pour down in sheets. There were clouds, sure, but not the kind that should cause a downpour like this. Something felt off. Rain drummed against the plastic hood of my coat. Every part of me wanted to run to the car, but the rules were clear. I wasn't risking it. And this rain, it felt salty, almost like seawater, but we were nowhere near the ocean. Then I noticed something strange. Toward the center of the field, there was a large patch where no rain was falling. Everywhere else it poured, but in that one square-shaped section, not a single drop. I made my way there slowly, boots sucking into the thick, muddy earth. I stepped into the center of the dry square and looked up. Nothing above me, no covering, no drone, no dome, nothing. But not a single drop touched me. All around, a storm raged. Inside that square, absolute calm. When the rain finally stopped, I trudged back to the car and placed the raincoat in the trunk just like they asked. Until 15:46, I mostly relaxed again, watching a show on my phone. It was actually kind of comfortable in a weird way. That's when I noticed something from the corner of my eye. Two people were walking past my car, both dressed in full hazmat suits, each carrying a large bag. They moved across the field like they knew exactly where they were going. One of them stopped in front of my car and waved. I waved back. Were these the hikers I was supposed to greet? The two figures continued toward the center of the field. I stepped out of the car and kept watching. They walked the entire field perimeter, stopping briefly at each corner to examine something. They seemed to be talking to each other, but I was too far to hear. Then, like they'd finished some task, they calmly walked into the woods and vanished between the trees. I figured it was best not to follow them. Easier to pretend this was all perfectly normal. But now, 1900 hours was drawing dangerously close. At exactly 1900 hours, the clock changed. I sat uncomfortably in the car, tense from that strange line in the manual. The closer it got to nightfall, the less I wanted to be here on this supposedly peaceful field. My legs bounced anxiously, and I leaned on the steering wheel, staring out at the open land. 15 minutes passed. Nothing happened. The field was as quiet and still as ever. I figured I might as well check what else was on the list for today. There were more entries after that "Do Not Die" line, which I'd kind of given up on reading earlier. 2141. If someone is on the property, politely ask them to leave. 0037. Important. If the man in the eyed rabbit mask is alone, immediately tell him he must leave the premises. He is not allowed to stay even one more minute. If the man in the rabbit mask is with someone, do not approach them, but ask them to leave politely from a distance. Do not follow them under any circumstances. 232. If a man is running in circles, ask him to leave. 617. Leave the geese alone. They will depart shortly on their own. I rubbed my eyes, frustrated and nervous. Once again, the most disturbing tasks were saved for night. Then my phone buzzed. A text from the usual number. Please lock your car doors and do not let anyone in. This is important. My blood turned cold. What now? Without hesitation, I locked the car from inside. Whatever came next, I was not opening that door. That's when I saw someone running across the field in the fading light. They were sprinting from the forest straight toward my car, stumbling, constantly glancing back like they were being chased. As they got closer, I realized it was one of the hikers I'd seen earlier that day. His hazmat suit and gas mask were torn and bloody. He ran up to my car and started pounding on the door, screaming, "Open up, please, open the door!" I didn't move. Frozen, I just sat there, unsure what to do. The man grew more frantic, desperately yanking at the door handle, shouting through the mask. And then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. Just gone. One moment screaming, the next emptiness, no trace. I sat motionless, stunned. Minutes passed, felt like hours. My phone buzzed again. Thank you, Stephen, for following our instructions. You've done a great service to the company. Your perseverance will not go unrewarded. My hands trembled as I texted back. Did that man just die? A reply came instantly. Number, that man is doing the job he was hired to do. I didn't write back. I locked myself inside the car again, just like last time. I sat in the car, still drowsy. My hands rested on the steering wheel and I was ready, so ready to drive off the moment I sensed anything even slightly off. That's when I noticed the time on my watch. It was 21:41. I was supposed to check the field to see if anyone was there. Every part of me resisted the idea of getting out. But something pulled me, and maybe it wasn't just the money anymore. I stepped out of the car but left the headlights on just in case. That's when I saw it. Someone was already out there. Another figure. He was sitting on a small wooden bench. An old man. Just like the woman the other night, he didn't seem to notice me at first. Not until I got closer. "Good evening, sir," I said gently. "I'm afraid you can't be here. I have to ask you to leave the property." The old man flinched and turned toward me with a sleepy, confused look. "Oh, you startled me. I didn't even see you coming." "Sorry, sir," I repeated calmly. "But you're not allowed to stay. Here, please, I have to ask you to leave." He looked around in panic as if he wasn't sure where he was. "Oh, I'm sorry," he muttered nervously. "I didn't know I wasn't supposed to be here, but where exactly am I?" I shook my head slightly. I didn't really know either. "Huh? Doesn't matter," the old man mumbled, then added, "But could you give me a hand, son? Help me up, would you?" He reached out. I took his bony, wrinkled hand. Just like the woman's hand days ago, it was warm and soft, as if it hadn't been sitting in the middle of a damp, cold field. There was something comforting about it. Familiar. He stood up with a groan, rubbing his back, wincing. "Let me tell you something, son," the old man said once he straightened up. "Trust your instincts. Don't be afraid. You'll be fine." Then he froze, his gaze fixed over my shoulder as if he saw something behind me. I turned in a panic. But it was only the dark forest. When I looked back, he was gone. Just like that. Only the old wooden bench remained. I trudged back to the car, my mind replaying the old man's words over and over. I sat inside and stared at the starry sky, watching the clouds drift quietly across the night. Somehow the old man had left me with a strange sense of calm. I was still scared, but I no longer felt like I was in real danger, like this wasn't my danger to face, not here, not now. Time passed quicker, too. It was only when the clock hit 00:35 that I snapped out of it. 2 minutes left until the next task. And my stomach tightened into a knot again. After a few tense seconds of scanning the field, I finally saw him. Or maybe he had just appeared. A man stood in the middle of the field wearing a tuxedo. On his head, a bright white rabbit mask with a cheerful grin. He was alone, perfectly still. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. My flashlight shook in my hand from nerves. I kept the beam trained on him the whole time as I approached. The rabbit-masked man didn't move. He stared directly into the light, unflinching. I stopped a few paces away. Something about him made my skin crawl. "Excuse me, sir," I called out, voice unsteady. "You're not allowed here. I need to ask you to leave the property." He didn't respond, just stood there, unmoving, his face completely hidden by the mask. His tuxedo was muddy and stained, like he'd been sleeping in the dirt all day. "Sir," I tried again, "please leave. You can't be here." He tilted his head slightly, like he was confused. Then, without warning, he took one step toward me. I flinched hard. Part of me wanted to run straight back to the car and leave this entire nightmare behind. "Sir," I repeated, trying to sound firm, "you really need to leave. Now." But the rabbit-masked man just stood there, still, gazing into my flashlight beam. He wasn't responding, not even reacting. What was I supposed to do? The others had always complied eventually. But this one didn't even seem to understand what I was saying. We just stood there staring at each other. I started thinking back to the manual. It said to ask politely. Politely. And this guy was wearing a tuxedo. Maybe I hadn't been respectful enough. "Dear sir," I tried again, putting on my most courteous tone, "please allow me to kindly ask you to leave the premises. I'm afraid you're not permitted to be here." And just like that, he moved. Without walking, without a word, he slowly raised one arm and waved at me. A small, parting wave. Then he turned around and began walking across the field toward the trees. I kept the flashlight on him the whole time, tracking his unsteady steps, but then he stopped at the forest edge. He turned to face me again and waved once more. This time it wasn't a goodbye. This time he was beckoning. He wanted me to follow him. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to follow that thing anywhere. Something about the way he moved, his legs bending the wrong way, his steps unsure and twisted, made my stomach churn. He kept beckoning. But I just shook my head. He lowered his arm almost sadly, then walked into the forest and vanished among the trees. I was relieved, terrified but relieved, though somehow it unsettled me even more that he hadn't disappeared like the others. He had simply walked away, limped away, like something real. I returned to the car and climbed inside. Then I locked the doors, just in case. I checked the time, waiting for the next scheduled event at 2:32 a.m. The man who would be running in circles. But time was crawling. I checked the clock every few minutes, but it felt like hours. Still over an hour to go. I leaned my head against the steering wheel, eyes heavy again, as the weight of everything slowly dragged me down into exhaustion. I must have dozed off again because I jolted awake in a panic. Only 20 minutes had passed, but something was off. The headlights were off, even though I'd left them on after the rabbit-masked man left. Dead battery? I flipped the lights off and then back on. They came on instantly and my heart nearly stopped. The rabbit-masked man was standing a few meters in front of the car, staring directly at me. But this time, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a woman in a long, elegant white evening gown. She wore a black rabbit mask, a mirror to the man's white one. Her face was completely obscured, only her long, curly blonde hair blew gently in the breeze. I was terrified. How long had they been standing there? What did they want from me? I'd already sent the man away once. Why had he come back? Should I try again? I forced myself to move, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the car, but didn't move an inch away from the door. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I pointed it at them. "I already asked you to leave once," I said, voice shaky. "I have to ask again. Please leave the property." They didn't move, just stood there staring into the beam of the headlights. Panic crawled up my spine. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. Still keeping my eyes locked on the two figures, I pulled it out. A text message from the usual number. "Warning. The rabbit-masked individuals are not supposed to be there. Leave the area immediately. I didn't wait a second longer. I jumped back into the car. That's when I heard the scream, a sound I couldn't place, like a hawk shrieking as it dives for prey, but sharper, worse. Then I saw the man in the tuxedo drop to all fours and charge, moving far faster than he had before, like a spider scuttling with unnatural precision. I slammed my foot on the gas. As I turned the car toward the forest path, the creature caught up. I heard it slam into the vehicle. Then the rear window shattered violently. I didn't stop, didn't look back. The dirt road was rough, but I pushed the car as fast as it would go. Then, a violent jolt. The creature had ripped the rear door clean off. With one pull, I kept driving, bouncing and skidding down the uneven trail. I just wanted out. Then, pain. Excruciating pain in my back. A hand, long clawed, reached inside, grasping blindly for me. I swerved hard. The car burst from the trees onto the paved road. The bottom scraped and sparked against the asphalt. I floored it, didn't care about anything else. The hand vanished, and I couldn't hear anything on the roof anymore. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a black pickup truck racing the opposite direction. The same one as always, but I didn't stop. Not even when I noticed blood dripping down my right arm and my back felt like it was on fire. I drove all the way back to the train station. The fat man was there waiting for me, but he wasn't smiling this time. He looked exhausted. It was nearly 4 a.m., and the parking lot was empty except for him. His eyes widened when he saw the car. The back door was missing, the vehicle torn up with deep gashes and scratches. I stepped out pale and shaking, my uniform soaked in blood. A deep slash on my shoulder still leaking steadily. "I'll take you to a doctor, son," the fat man said quietly. That's the last thing I heard. I collapsed, either from the blood loss or from the weight of the nightmare I'd just lived through. I woke up in my apartment. It was daytime and my wounds had been neatly treated. On my nightstand were some pills and a piece of paper explaining how I should take them. Next to it was a thick envelope with my name on it. It hurt to move. Every part of my body ached. But I was curious about the envelope. Inside was a letter from the company. "Stephen, thank you for your service. On behalf of the company, we'd like to apologize for what happened and offer a small honorarium as a token of our appreciation. We hope to work with you again soon. The company." Inside the envelope was $10,000 in cash. I had never had that much money in my life. For a few days, I stayed locked inside my room. I didn't want to go out. I was looking for a job. I didn't want to work for the company again. The money was good, sure, but my life was more important. A few weeks later, my wounds were healing and I found a job. The company messaged me twice, offering open shifts. I never replied. It was better that way. I worked at a 24-hour convenience store in a miserable part of town. The job sucked. My boss was a complete asshole, always yelling at everyone like we were dirt under his shoes. The pay was awful, barely enough to cover the bills. I was slowly burning through the money the company had given me. Most of my shifts were at night, and the only customers were drunk people, homeless folks, or shady weirdos buying God knows what. One night I stood behind the register watching a staggering homeless man dig through the alcohol shelf. I glanced outside. The streets were dark and empty, lit only by the flickering streetlights. And then I saw him. The man in the rabbit mask. Still wearing his filthy, muddy tuxedo, he stood there on the other side of the glass, waving at me, beckoning me to come. I broke out in a cold sweat. I panicked. I wanted to run. I looked around, searching for a way out. But the figure outside was gone. Did I imagine it? Then my phone buzzed again. Another open shift. I looked around the store. The homeless guy was still shuffling through the vodka, and everything else was still bright and dull. As much as I was terrified, deep down I felt it. Something in me longed to go back. Not just for the money, the place was calling me. Maybe should I go back? Story 1 ends here. Now, let's begin story 2. The lavatory rules. The day was supposed to be the same as any other. Even the air was the same. I was sitting in the last stall of the third-floor men's room, hiding from a world of spreadsheets and deadlines, procrastinating. The low, monotonous hum of the ventilation system filled the air. A futile attempt to overpower the faint but persistent smell of cheap disinfectant and something vaguely organic beneath it. A scent that always lingered in these corporate sanctuaries. From the next stall, I could hear the muffled tapping of a phone keyboard, a rhythmic sound that was the universal language of paid idleness. You know the feeling. The tranquility of a corporate afternoon disturbed only by the echo of a dripping faucet in the otherwise silent room, lined with sterile white tiles. My mind was empty, filled with nothing but dull boredom and thoughts of the approaching weekend. Then it happened. Distant muffled sounds. First a single sharp scream, quickly cut off as if muffled by a hand. Then a bang, hollow and heavy like a filing cabinet falling over, and then without any transition the piercing, shrieking wail of the fire alarm. My first reaction wasn't fear, but irritation. Another drill. We'd be standing outside in the rain again, waiting to be let back to our spreadsheets. The sounds were filtered through layers of concrete and steel, distorted and confusing as if coming from a great distance or from a strange dream. And then, as suddenly as they had begun, they stopped. The alarm died mid-cycle, leaving a phantom ringing in my ears. The screaming had been silenced. A deep, unnatural quiet fell. It wasn't a peaceful silence, it was heavy and oppressive, amplified by the dead acoustics of the tiled room. This sudden shift from noise to silence is a classic horror technique for building suspense. In that silence, for the first time, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. And then came the first heavy, wet thud. Not a knock. There was no living force behind it. It was the sound of dead weight slumped against the main restroom door. My body reacted before my brain could process the situation. I tasted the metallic electric tang of pure adrenaline in my mouth. My heart began to pound against my ribs so hard it physically hurt. A cold sweat, smelling sharper and more acidic than usual, the scent of fear itself full of stress hormones, ran down my back. My vision narrowed into a tight tunnel, my brain instinctively focusing all attention on the door, ignoring everything else. I was trapped. The principle of inevitability revealed itself in all its horror. There was no escape from this room. The environment itself had become my adversary. Every sound, every echo was amplified and distorted by the hard, non-porous surfaces. The restroom wasn't just a place where I was stuck. It had become an active participant in my terror, a psychological weapon that intensified every wave of horror. In a fit of panic as my thoughts raced wildly, a memory flashed through my mind. Carl, the guy from the night security team, had forgotten his walkie-talkie here an hour ago. He'd left it in the stall next to mine when he went to wash his hands. It was a spark of hope, a tangible goal that pulled me out of my paralyzing fear. Having a goal, no matter how small, was better than drowning in helplessness. The journey to it was the longest of my life. I had to crawl on the filthy, sticky floor under the partition. Every sound, the scuff of a shoe, the rustle of my pants, echoed like a gunshot in the silence. I felt vulnerable, humiliated, like an animal cornered. The floor was cold and damp. I could feel every pebble and dried stain. Finally, I clutched it in my hand. Cold, heavy plastic. I turned it on. Instead of a clear voice, there was only the loud hiss of static, a sound that underscored my isolation rather than alleviating it. I pressed the button, my fingers trembling. "Hello, is anyone there? This is Mark from accounting." Over. Silence, just the crackle like dying stars, and then finally a response. Carl's. But it wasn't his usual calm baritone. It was a distorted rasp, soaked in pain and panic, filtered through cheap electronics and the hell that had broken loose on his end. "Mark? Where the hell are you? Get out of there now." "I can't, Carl. There's something at the door. What's happening?" His reply came in fragments, interrupted by static and his own ragged breathing. Every word was torn from his lungs with immense effort. "They're not people, Mark. They're not people. They're tearing flesh. God, they..." His voice broke in a fit of coughing, wet and ragged. "I got a scratch. Just a scratch. It's nothing. But it burns. It burns like hell." In that moment, I understood. The walkie-talkie wasn't a tool of rescue. It was a direct line into the heart of the apocalypse. Instead of connecting me to the outside world, it trapped me in an intimate auditory relationship with a man who was dying and turning into a monster. Every crackle, every distortion of his voice pulled me deeper into despair. I wasn't just a listener. I was a witness. Trapped with Carl's dying voice in the receiver, my senses overloaded. I started to notice smells that weren't there before. The coppery tang of my own fear sweat and a faint sweetish smell of rot that seemed to rise from the drains. Every detail in the room seemed menacing and hostile. The chrome soap dispenser cast distorted reflections. The grout between the tiles looked like dark scars. In a desperate, irrational attempt to do something, anything, to keep from thinking about the sounds outside, I looked into the toilet bowl. And there, deep in the drain, wedged in the bend of the S-trap, I saw something that didn't belong. A piece of plastic wrap. With a revulsion that mixed with desperate curiosity, I reached in and pulled out a small, slimy, plastic-wrapped piece of paper. It was covered in shaky, desperate handwriting. It was a list of rules that made no rational sense. It was a mixture of the mundane and the inexplicable, a hallmark of the internet creepypastas I sometimes read for amusement. But this wasn't amusing. This was a new, terrifying layer of reality being forced upon me. Rules 1. Do not flush between 3 and 4 o'clock. It can hear. 2. When the lights flicker 3 times, close your eyes. Do not open them until you hear the singing. 3. The voice on the radio is not your friend, but it's all you have. 4. Do not trust the mirrors. They lie about who is behind you. 5. If the stall door moves on its own, offer it a name, not your own. These rules were not a guide for surviving zombies. They were a form of psychological warfare. They forced me to choose between rational action and ritualistic obedience. Rule 3 immediately sowed paranoia towards Carl, my only connection to the world. Rule 4 attacked my sensory perception, my ability to trust my own eyes. Rule 2 demanded a passive, faith-based act, closing my eyes in the face of a threat which contradicted every survival instinct. I knew that under extreme stress, the brain's ability to think rationally is impaired. These rules exploited that. They pushed me from logic toward paranoid, magical thinking. The real horror now lay not just in the monsters outside the door, but in the question. Were these rules just the ravings of a madman or the actual physics of this new, terrifying reality? I tested the rules immediately. "Carl?" I whispered into the radio, my voice trembling. "I found a piece of paper here, with rules on it. Do you know anything about it?" Carl's response was exactly what Rule 3 had predicted. A confused, irritated growl punctuated by wheezing. What rules?" "Mark, snap out of it. Focus, you have to find..." His voice was lost in a coughin fit that sounded like his lungs were tearing apart. Was he lying? Or did he genuinely not know about them, which would make them even more sinister? My isolation deepened. I was alone, with a dying man and a mad list. And then his decomposition began. I was his sole witness, a helpless listener as his mind and body collapsed in real time. His transformation occurred in stages, which I followed through the distorted speaker of the walkie-talkie. And it was terrifyingly similar to clinical descriptions of delirium and psychotic states. Phase 1, coherent pain. His speech was strained but still logical. He described what he saw on the security monitors, trying to advise me. "There are too many of them. At the reception desk. They don't move fast, but they're strong. Mark, I saw them bend the steel server room door with their bare hands. They just pushed." Phase 2, feverish confusion. His voice grew hoarse, his breathing shallow and labored. He began to show signs of feverish delirium. He repeated, himself lost his train of thought, his sentences falling apart. "The doors? You have to lock the doors. Did you lock them, Mark? Did you lock that scratch? It burns? Why does it burn so much?" His thinking became disjointed, disorganized. Phase 3, paranoid delirium. The infection attacked his mind. He described hallucinations, shadows moving on the monitors, whispers in the static. His paranoia, a key symptom of psychosis, turned against me. "Why are you in that bathroom for so long? Are you waiting for them? Are you with them? I can hear you whispering to them. I know you're with them." His speech was now a mixture of lucid warnings and psychotic delusion, making him a completely unreliable narrator of the outside world. Phase 4, animalistic agony. The human part of Carl was fading. His words devolved into gasps, pained whimpers, and finally the guttural wet gurgle of the infected. The last thing I heard wasn't words, but the sound of his humanity being violently extinguished. The sound of tearing flesh and cracking bone, transmitted with terrifying fidelity. Being limited to only sound, I was forced to experience his transformation much more intimately. The voice is the carrier of personality, and I was listening as one personality was erased step by step and replaced by something monstrous. This wasn't just a story about a monster. It was a tragedy about the destruction of a soul, broadcast live. The pace quickened. The fluorescent light above my stall began to die. It flickered once, twice. The high, irritating buzz of a dying ballast cut into my ears like an insect burrowing into my brain. Rule 2 throbbed in my head. When the lights flicker 3 times, close your eyes. I faced an impossible choice. Trust the insane rule or maintain awareness of my surroundings. Rationality versus magic. Survival versus faith. The third flicker. Absolute tangible darkness. In a spasm of pure terror, I obeyed. I squeezed my eyes shut. It was an act of surrender, a relinquishment of my rational mind to the cryptic authority of that piece of paper. And then the horror for my ears began. Sight was gone. Sound was everything. First, just as the rule had predicted, I heard a faint, ethereal singing. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, from the pipes. It was beautiful and, in its incongruity, utterly terrifying. It sounded like a choir, but without words, just a pure, mournful melody. Then the sound at the door changed. The mindless thudding stopped. It was replaced by a slow, intelligent, metallic scraping. Something was deliberately trying to get in, not with brute force, but with cunning. The shift from raw power to guile made the threat feel more personal and sinister. And finally, Carl's last transmission. It was no longer his voice. From the radio came a piercing scream of pure agony, a hideous wet gurgle, and a final deafening click as the walkie-talkie went silent forever. The main lights buzzed back on, blindingly bright. The scraping and the singing were gone. The return to normal was more jarring than the darkness. The threat had demonstrated its ability to manipulate the environment, confirming that the rules were terrifyingly accurate. My rational understanding of the world had collapsed. When a person's model of reality shatters under extreme stress, they become susceptible to adopting alternative belief systems. And I had just found mine. I was left in a deafening silence. I stared at my reflection in the small piece of polished metal on the toilet paper dispenser. I remembered Rule 4. Do not trust the mirrors. They lie about who is behind you. For a split second in my mind, ravaged by stress and suggestion, I saw a figure in the reflection behind me. A tall, dark silhouette. I spun around. Nothing. Just white tiles. The ambiguity of whether it was a real supernatural event or a stress-induced hallucination was the core of my new madness. My perception was forever broken. I could no longer trust my own eyes. The scratching on my stall door began again, but it was different, softer. A single deliberate tap, tap, tap. The handle moved slightly on its own, slowly, as if someone were gently testing it. I remembered the last rule. If the stall door moves on its own, offer it a name, not your own. It was the final quiet, terrifying moment. I had no fight left in me. I had accepted the new reality. I looked at the dead walkie-talkie, the last relic of my connection to the rational world and to the man who embodied its horrific end. In a quiet, trembling whisper, barely audible even in the tomb-like silence, I offered the only name I had left, the name that belonged to the voice that had guided me through death. Carl. The handle stopped moving, and then there was only silence. But I knew deep in my mind this wasn't the end. Story 2 ends here now. We drift into Story 3. The time I flew a box I shouldn't have. The cold, dry wind whistled against the fuselage of my Cessna 185. I brushed my hand along the line of rivets, a nervous habit, making sure none were loose. I glanced at my watch. He's late, I murmured to myself. I finished my pre-flight, screwing the fuel caps on tight when I heard the sound of dirt and rocks flinging from tires. I hopped down from the wing and saw it, a silver F-150 hauling ass across the ramp. A man about 6 feet tall with greasy hair and a black leather jacket stepped out. He looked twitchy, his eyes scanning the empty airfield. "You said 7:30, it's now 8:30, I said, crossing my arms. "This thing isn't light, you know," he shot back, his voice strained. "Took me 30 minutes just to get it in the bed." He gestured behind him. In the truck bed sat the cargo. It was a crate, maybe 4 feet long, made of a dark, oily-looking wood and bound with thick, pitted iron straps. It looked like it had been pulled from the bottom of a lake. "What is it?" I asked, walking closer. "Don't know. Don't care," he said, pulling a thick envelope from his jacket. "This is for you. The rest when you land at Miller Field." The weight of whatever the box is was astounding. It took both of us grunting and sweating to slide it into the back of the Cessna. It wasn't just heavy, it was a dead, dense weight that seemed to suck the energy out of you. When I slammed the cargo door shut, the whole plane seemed to groan. The takeoff was sluggish. I had to keep the nose higher than usual, the controls feeling mushy and unresponsive. My baby was complaining about the load. As I climbed out of the valley, the last rays of sunlight painted the jagged peaks in strokes of orange and blood red. Below me, the world was a sea of dark pine and shadowed rock, unbroken by a single light. No roads, no houses, nothing. Out here, all the towers were dark. No flight plan, no radios, just you and the sky. It's a freedom I used to crave. I leveled off at 10,000 feet, the engine settling into its familiar, comforting drone after putting it into cruise. The air was smooth. I checked my gauges, all in the green. I leaned back, letting the autopilot do its job, and watched the first stars begin to prick the deep violet sky. It was peaceful. For a moment, I almost forgot about the strange cargo sitting just a few feet behind my head. That's when my left wing dipped. It wasn't turbulence. It was a slow, heavy roll, like the plane had suddenly gained 1,000 pounds on one side. I grabbed the yoke, my knuckles white, and fought it back to level. The autopilot whined, fighting me before I clicked it off. My heart hammered against my ribs. I scanned the instruments. Airspeed, altitude, engine temp, all normal. Then I saw the attitude indicator. My artificial horizon, the instrument I trusted with my life, was tilted at a sickening 40-degree angle. It showed the plane in a steep, unrecoverable bank. But the real horizon outside my window was perfectly straight. My inner ear screamed that we were level, but the instrument was lying. I tapped the glass. The little blue and brown ball didn't budge. As I stared, my magnetic compass floating serenely in its housing began to drift. It swung past north, then west, and kept going, slowly, deliberately, until the big red S was pointing directly ahead. It was pointing forward, through the instrument panel, through the engine block. No, not forward. It was pointing behind me. It was pointing at the box. A cold sweat trickled down my spine. This wasn't an electrical failure. This was wrong. I forced my eyes away from the lying instruments and looked outside. I would fly by sight. Forget the panel, just fly the plane. My hand trembled as I reached for the GPS, hoping for some semblance of sanity. The screen flickered to life. A small icon of a plane sat in the center of the map. According to the screen, I was still sitting on the ramp at Kistler's Pass. The flight timer in the corner of the screen read 00001. I had been flying for over an hour, but the GPS claimed I had never left. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. I was flying blind. My instruments were possessed. My GPS was stuck in a time loop, and there was no one to call. The radio was just a box of useless static. The only thing in my plane that seemed to have any sense of direction was pointing at the silent, dark crate in my cargo hold. I had to get it out. The thought was insane. Depressurize the cabin, muscle a cargo door open against a 120-knot wind, and somehow shove a crate of impossible weight out into the night. But it was the only thought that made any sense. As I contemplated the suicidal maneuver, my eyes drifted to the landscape below. The moon was bright, casting the jagged peaks in sharp, silver relief. I stared at the endless sea of rock and snow, and then I saw it. One of the peaks, a massive fang of granite miles away, seemed to shift. It wasn't a landslide. It was a slow, deliberate movement, like a great beast turning in its sleep. I blinked, my eyes watering from the strain, and when I looked again, it was just a mountain, still and silent. Was it real? Or was the thing in the box not just breaking my instruments, but breaking my mind too? The idea of ditching the crate vanished. If it could do that to a mountain, what would it do to me if I got any closer? The job was to fly it to Miller Field, so I would fly. I ignored the panel, a graveyard of flickering lies. I flew by the seat of my pants, my eyes fixed on the stars, my knuckles aching from my grip on the yoke. Hours bled into one another. The engine's drones seemed to warp, sometimes sounding like a whisper, sometimes a scream. Finally, I saw them, a string of pale blue lights, impossibly faint in the vast darkness. Miller Field. I aimed for it like a man dying of thirst aims for a mirage. The approach was a nightmare. My altimeter was frozen at 10,000 feet. I judged my descent by the growing size of the pine trees, my airspeed by the pitch of the wind screaming past the cockpit. Every instinct I had was screaming that this was wrong, that I was too fast, too steep. I ignored it all and trusted my eyes. The runway lights rushed up to meet me. I flared, held my breath, and waited for the impact. The tires kissed the asphalt with a gentle chirp. It was the smoothest landing of my life. I taxied toward the far end of the field where a single, unblinking light marked a derelict hangar. An old black panel van with no windows was parked there, its engine off. As I cut my own engine, a figure stepped out of the van's shadow. It was a woman, tall and severe, dressed in a heavy canvas coat despite the mild night. She wore thick leather gloves. I stumbled out of the Cessna, my legs shaking. She didn't say hello, she just looked at me, her gaze analytical, then glanced at my plane. "The instruments?" she asked. Her voice was flat, devoid of curiosity. "They're shot," I rasped. She gave a single nod as if I'd just confirmed the weather. "Payment," she said, holding out an envelope identical to the first one. She and a man who emerged from the van, equally silent and grim, didn't ask for my help. They used a small wheel dolly to expertly slide the crate from my plane and into their van. The process was efficient, practiced. I stood there, dumbly holding the envelope as they latched the van doors. The woman paused before getting in the driver's seat. "Get some rest," she said, her eyes boring into mine. "The influence fades with distance. You'll be fine by morning." Then she was gone, the van's taillights disappearing down a service road. I was alone. The silence of the airfield was absolute. After a long moment, I climbed back into the cockpit, my body aching. I slumped into the pilot's seat and my eyes fell on the instrument panel. Everything was perfect. The attitude indicator was perfectly level. The compass pointed north. The GPS showed my plane sitting at the end of the runway at Miller Field, and the flight timer read 02:17:43. It was all real. I stared out into the empty night, the cash on the seat beside me feeling colder than any wind. I had flown the box, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my soul that I would never be the same. Story 3 ends here. Now listen closely to story 4. The forest changed around me. I don't think it wanted me to leave. I arrived near Carrizo Springs Campground on a Saturday morning in late May and started west. My destination was Cone Peak, a barren crag towering high above the Santa Lucia Range. In this isolated stretch of California's central coast, wildfires and landslides erase trails as fast as they're blazed, reshaping the land with every season. This is no place to travel alone. Nobody knew I was out there. I didn't leave a note or send a text. I brought a small day pack, a day's supply of food and 2.5 liters of water. No iodine tablets, no satellite phone. I figured I'd be back in 6 hours. The first few miles felt easy. I climbed through dry brush and blooming deerweed humming with bees. Monkey flowers lit up the path, catching the sun's orange glow. But the chaparral scrub offered no shade, and the yellow sandstone beneath me radiated heat as morning turned to early afternoon. My shadow grew long as I approached the final mile of my ascent. I pulled out my phone to check the time. 4:37 p.m. Odd, I could have sworn it was still early afternoon. Maybe the heat was messing with my sense of time. Still, the days were long this time of year. If I picked up my pace, I'd have no trouble making it back before dark. As I neared the summit of Cone Peak, the trail narrowed into a knife-edge ridge. One wrong step in either direction and I'd fall hundreds of feet. But the cool wind rising from the ocean below put me at ease. I paused to eat lunch and snap a few photos of the vast network of ridges and valleys stretching out to the ocean below. As I reached for my phone, a sudden gust knocked me off balance. I slipped and tumbled off the edge. The world spun around me as I slid down the cliff, scraping against loose rock and brittle roots. Then I stopped, my back slamming hard against rock as I swung backward. My pack had snagged on the gnarled limb of a bristlecone fir, leaving me dangling over the canyon by my shoulder straps. I clawed at the branch and pulled myself back to solid ground. My backpack was in rough shape. The seam above my right shoulder strap clung by a few threads. My back was bruised and my shoulders ached. Worse, the larger of my 2 water bottles had fallen down the cliff and out of sight. My remaining bottle was half full. Shaken, I pressed on, reaching the summit soon after. 2 hikers stood beneath a boarded-up fire lookout at the summit, gazing west over the Pacific. I didn't speak to them. Something about them made me hesitate. It wasn't fear exactly, but an unease I couldn't explain. From where I stood, I couldn't quite make out their faces, just the stillness. The way their heads tilted ever so slightly, like they were listening for something I couldn't hear. I began my descent into the valley scored into the peak's western flank. Soon the trail turned to granite scree. Charred pine trunks blocked the switchbacks, and I scrambled over them until I reached Trail Spring Campground, or at least what was left of it. A small creek ran between a ring of rocks and a burnt Forest Service sign, the only evidence people ever stayed there. Deer brush and poison oak swallowed the trail beyond. I spotted pruned branches every few yards. Someone had passed this way recently, cutting a path. My phone on airplane mode to save battery showed me I was close to the junction back to Carrizo Creek Trail. Less than a mile to go, I thought, then 5 miles downhill to my car. But something felt wrong. The trail of pruned branches stopped. The path vanished. My phone said I was only 100 feet off the trail, so I climbed up a deadfall to get my bearings. I spun around, and the path I'd come up was gone. Mountains rose where none had been before. New valleys cut into the slopes around me. Dense pine forests shaded the once open shrubland. I pushed through the brush toward where the trail should be, but thorns clawed at me, pulling me back. Something snagged my pack. I lunged forward, the strap snapped, and I slammed hard onto the ground. When I stood up, my phone was gone. I searched. I climbed back up the log. I crawled on my hands and knees. Nothing. The GPS, my only guide, had disappeared. I scanned the valley. To the south, brush and trees. To the west, a steep drop. East, a wall of green forest. The sun baked the ridge above me. I was filthy, bruised, dehydrated, and lost. I found shade beneath a low elderberry tree and curled up beneath its branches. I remembered my chest strap had a whistle built in, so I blew Morse code. SOS, I think. But there was no one to hear it. The sound swept up into the wind, the forest leaving nothing behind. And then I slept. I woke to the sound of chewing. My mouth was dry and my eyes stung as I forced them open. The canopy above flickered with moonlight, shadows dancing across the bed of pine needles around me. I jolted upright and the noise stopped. The paws of dozens of gray, chittering forms dug into my skin as they raced across my arms and legs. My backpack, hanging on by its remaining strap, was riddled with holes gnawed through its fabric. The swarm of mice vanished into the brush, leaving behind torn scraps and glimmering bits of a Cliff Bar wrapper. They had found my food. I leapt from the brush. More mice scattered. They chewed through the plastic, ruined everything. All my food was gone. They watched me. Tiny pairs of eyes in the brush, glinting in the moonlight, hundreds of them, unmoving. A branch snapped behind me and they scattered out of sight. I looked back at an open woodland extending to the edge of a steep slope. The forest was still. I heard running water somewhere below, or maybe wind. But the sound seemed to move as I listened, like it was circling me. I started downhill, forcing my way through brush. I pulled back as I stumbled onto a stone precipice. I looked down at the bottomless canyon shadowed from the moon's glow. Then the terrain gave way beneath me. I raised my arms to protect my head as stones battered me from all directions. Great trees groaned and snapped under the avalanche of falling debris. Branches slashed my skin. Gravity turned sideways, the earth shifting on its axis, pulling me into the abyss. I awoke atop a pile of rubble. Pain radiated from my already bruised shoulders and blood dripped down my arm. The sky was black. I must have tumbled hundreds of feet, maybe more. My leg throbbed. I sat up, brushing sand from my tattered shirt. Nothing was broken, I think, but walking would be harder now. I stood on the canyon floor among boulders weathered smooth by millennia of rushing water. The air was cool and alder trees loomed above me, their leaves whispering even though there was no breeze. I searched for the creek I passed back at the campground. It must have drained into this valley. Nothing. The creek bed was dry, but something else was there. Shapes in the woods. Not animals, not human. The kind of thing you don't see but feel, like static in the air. It beckoned me closer and my blood turned to ice. I spun away and ran downstream, scrambling over rock slides and tangled branches as the forest collapsed around me. Time no longer flowed, it pulsed. Trees burst from bare soil in an instant, towering overhead before erupting into flame, blazing against a starless sky. The air roared with heat as a strong headwind fed the growing inferno. Still I pushed forwards, my shadow dancing across the path ahead cast from orange flame. As I ran, the endless night grew tired of its pursuit. The ground below me was ash, and the silhouettes of burned trees smoldered below a gray sky. A low mist hung in the air, and steep canyon walls surrounded me on both sides. The way forward downstream seemed clear now. Soon the sun crested the cliffs above, flooding the canyon with golden light. A canopy of poplars swayed gently in a warm breeze. Cicadas shrieked from the treetops as the sun rose higher overhead. Gradually, the steep cliffs flanking the riverbed gave way to a forest of walnuts and sycamores. By midday, I heard a new sound, a car rushing down a highway, then another. I pushed forward faster than I thought possible, driven by the fear that if I stopped, the forest would pull me back under. I broke through a wall of bramble and staggered onto pavement. Highway 1. I don't remember who picked me up. I was blinking in the sunlight, unable to speak. They drove me to the hospital in Monterey. I was dehydrated, bruised, and covered in shallow cuts, but alive. I checked out of the hospital that same evening. It was June 1st. I had been gone for over a week. But to me, it had only been a day, maybe 2. I'm not sure if I blacked out or if it was something else. I spoke to a ranger in the lobby on my way out. My roommate had returned home from summer vacation and reported me missing 3 days earlier. I tried to explain the events leading up to that day. He told me the trail I was trying to take was impassable. It had been destroyed years ago in a landslide. Nobody prunes it. He handed me my phone. It turned up in the parking lot by my car, 20 miles across a mountain range from where I ended up on Highway 1. It was lying face up on the gravel, battery dead. Story 4 ends here, and now we enter the fog of Story 5. Elam, the train to nowhere. Have you ever found yourself bored with your place in life? Unsure of where to go or how to get there? That is where I found myself the day after I graduated high school. I had made good grades, but by no means anything to brag about, unlike my twin brother, Phil. He had always made the best grades and was at the end of summer he would be going off to college with a full ride. For me, the promise of higher education was a fleeting wish that would never be fulfilled. "What do you know, Joe?" the woman sang out as I sat in the stagecoach of the abandoned train. "Just as much as you, Sue," I said, leaning forward and pecking her on her freckled nose. She scrunched her nose before sliding in next to me. "Still pouting in this dingy place like always, are you expecting the conductor to take you someplace far away?" she said, resting her head on my shoulder. "It wouldn't be the first time," I said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "I knew I'd find you two in here," Phil said, pulling himself up and into the stagecoach. He tussled at his wavy hair before sitting opposite of us. "Right as always, little bro," I stated with a slight grin on my face. Well, you were in such a hurry to get out. Bronze before brains has always been my motto. You're only 7 minutes older than me anyways, Phil retorted, pushing his glasses up on his nose in his usual Poindexter movement. Yeah, whatever. At least I have character. Oh, you have plenty of character. Dad has had so many character-building moments for you, I'm surprised there aren't two of you, Phil said before all three of us started laughing. After we began to settle from the laughter, Sue asked, "Is Will coming?" I thought for sure he would have been tailing right behind you. No, he, didn't. Well, you know. He's worried about what people think, Phil stammered, looking down at his fidgeting hands. Sue placed a hand on his with a look of reassurance. "Ah, fuck him," I said, giving my brother a punch on the arm. "He acts like the whole town doesn't already know about you two." Phil gave a slight smile before sitting back in his seat. The thud of more passengers boarding the stage couch brought our conversation to a temporary hold. We watched as the stagecoach quickly filled with the kids from the town. We exchanged words with nearly everyone who walked by. As the last of the seats filled, we heard the familiar sound of the train's whistle. "All aboard!" shouted the train conductor, his body leaning out from the train, a hand holding onto the doorway between the stagecoach and the engine. The three of us all pulled tickets from our pockets and scribbled a note on the back before holding them up. The train conductor walked by and collected our tickets before stepping onto the next set of passengers. As he returned and stepped towards the engine, we felt the hard pull of the train moving forward. As we were about to continue our conversation and discuss our destination, a boy I recognized from the football team slipped in and tried to find an empty seat. Looking at our table, he moved right past us as Phil had scooted to block any other occupants. The boy hurried to find another seat. "A risk taker," Sue said with a grave tone. Phil and I both nodded in agreement. "Jesus, how long do you think it's been since someone tried to get on without a ticket?" I asked rhetorically. "A few months at least," Phil answered before shaking his head. We kept our discussion low, trying not to think of what would end up happening to the stowaway. But the entire atmosphere of the train had changed from lighthearted to sullen as many had noticed the late entrant. Despite the routine, I gave a slight jump at the sound of the whistle. "First stop coming up, the Pyramids of Egypt," the train conductor yelled, a wide smile that didn't reach his eyes as he stepped into the stagecoach. "The Pyramids of Egypt, the first stop of the day." A few of the newer riders started to shift in their seats as we approached the station. It was common for new riders to always hop off on the first stop. You had more time to explore and a far harder chance of missing the train on the return journey. We had spent countless rides getting off and exploring the tombs of pharaohs and lounging on the Nile before we finally decided to ride further. The first group got off in Egypt and the train rolled off to the next stop. The late addition to the train hadn't taken advantage of the opportunity and exited while he still hadn't been caught. We stayed on the train as we passed Athens, Berlin, Tokyo, San Juan, Sao Paulo, and London. We began to prepare ourselves for the next destination of Paris, the stowaway still aboard as well. As the conductor walked down the aisle announcing the next stop of Paris, he stopped just as he passed the boy who had failed to give a ticket. "Excuse me, sir, I seem to have forgotten to collect your ticket," he said, his head turning faster than his body. A cold chill in his voice that made Sue and several others still aboard shiver. You already collected it, the boy said, visibly sweating. He said, placing a white leather-gloved hand on the table in front of the boy, his hands spread as wide as his smile. That would be quite impossible. I have quite the memory, you see, and I distinctly remember not grabbing a ticket from you. The boy shrank in his seat, the conductor narrowing the distance between them. The silence in the stagecoach became deafening as all eyes were focused on the two. No one rides for free on this train, and train hoppers are the filth I despise the most, the conductor said in a pleasant tone, his face still showing a joyful expression. You are a common thief. No better than one, at least, for trying to steal a ride. I'm afraid you will have to speak with the driver, the conductor said, his hand jumping to the boy's wrist and squeezing it tight. The sudden movement startled a yelp from the boy. Such a shame, really. I asked for so little to ride to such ponderous places, the conductor stated as he dragged the boy towards the engine. Despite the protests and screams, the conductor moved without struggle. The wriggling body in his grasp was unable to slow the ascent to the front. As the door between the engine and stagecoach opened and closed, all of the resistant cries ceased. Sorry for the inconvenience, everyone, the conductor sang as he returned moments later, his gloves wet with the crimson liquid. Everyone aboard will be given a complimentary ticket for the disturbance. We hope this will accommodate for the unwelcome company and unpleasantries of having your peace disturbed, he said as a hand darted within his coat and re-emerged, holding a stack of tickets. He handed them out to the remaining passengers before announcing we would arrive shortly in Paris. Everyone aboard exited as soon as we arrived. We enjoyed the lights of 1899 Paris, doing what we could to forget the disturbing display. No one knew what happened if you had to see the driver, only that no one ever came back. After a few hours of sightseeing, we heard the familiar ring of the return whistle. We rushed back and boarded the train as the conductor made his final call. We rode back in silence, everyone aware of the absence of the stowaway. As we arrived back to our small town, I glanced at the ticket I had been given. A dried, bloody print stood out on the glossy silver paper. This ticket authorizes the holder to one free round-trip ride on the express train to nowhere. A sense of foreboding filled me, and when I looked over at Phil, he returned my gloomy expression. We both agreed that we should avoid using our tickets. It might not be worth riding to the end of the line. We had never heard of anyone who used an express ticket and made it back alive. I lounged beneath a tree as Sue and Phil worked on their homework. It had been a long week of boring classes and impromptu quizzes, and I was doing my best to procrastinate my workload until Monday morning. You know, if you did it now, you wouldn't have to wait until minutes before it was due to finish it, Sue said, looking up from her work, a hand blocking the sun out from her eyes. The whole point of the train is to enjoy the places it takes us, not to cram as much of the real world inside it. She has a point, Joe. If you went ahead and did it, you wouldn't feel so rushed. Plus, you wouldn't have to copy my work, Phil said, nose still inches from the paper. Then how would you feel if you didn't have someone to beg for your mercy and praise your work all the time? I mockingly asked. Oh, I'd do just fine. Plus, I wouldn't have teachers constantly asking if you copied my work. Like they can tell the difference as it is, I said, standing up and walking over. It is getting close to departure time anyways. We don't want to miss the return trip. We packed up our belongings and strolled back to the station. Within minutes, the train appeared and welcomed us aboard. As the others boarded behind us, we found seats and I laid my head against the window. Glancing out at the oasis and pyramids, I saw one of the seniors of our school rushing towards the train. Just as he reached the station platform, the train departed back to our town. He had missed it by seconds, and the wait for the next return would not be pleasant. When riding the train to nowhere, there are a few important things to remember. You always pay for your ticket, no matter the secret. If you miss the return trip, you must wait at the station for the next return. If you are returning after missing the train, always board the return trip home. The cost of riding to the end of the line is greater than what you will find there. I have missed the return trip only once since I started taking the train. Ever since, I have always made sure to not miss it ever again. It had been our first time riding beyond Egypt. Our anticipation was higher than it had ever been before. When we scribbled our secret on the back of the ticket and handed it to the conductor, he had paused before moving to the next group. Ah, the young gentleman and young lady wish to see the fabulous features of France today. How exciting! His enticing and cheerful tone did not match his starving eyes. We nodded and turned our heads away from him. Remember, the longer we ride out, the less time you have to explore. Make sure you keep track of the time. It would be a great sorrow to see any of you lose your head. The cheerful warning echoed in our minds, but the most unsettling was his plastered smile that never seemed to falter from his face. When the train returned, we had been in a full sprint, not used to the much shorter time. Phil and Sue had barely boarded as the train departed, leaving me behind. I sat on the ground with a thud, worried about the warning I had received before we arrived. The atmosphere had changed as soon as the train departed. What had been the city of lights had slowly grown dark, and a new brightness began to emerge. Flames across the city began to arise as the fire of cannons and gunshots echoed the station. From outside, I could hear chants of Viva la Revolution and Mortem Tyrannis as I curled myself up and waited the long hours for my brother and girlfriend to return. Those long hours spent with the ground shaking beneath me, the gates leading into the station repeatedly bombarded with the pounding of fists and the begging of people to be let in. All I could do was huddle in fear as I prayed for the train to return. After what felt like hours, the train returned, dropping off another group of travelers. Sue and Phil rushed from the train and embraced me, worry plastered on their faces. We waited at the station for the return trip. It would be months before I ever braved beyond Egypt after that experience. "It is always polite to board once the train has returned, sir," the conductor stated as I boarded later. "I'm sorry I lost track of time," I said, refusing to make eye contact with the smiling face above me. "No harm, no foul. Just be conscious of the time going forward," he said, placing a gloved hand on my shoulder in a gesture that was anything but comforting. I began to write on the back of a ticket but was stopped. "No need at all, sir. Every ticket is a round trip. You just missed your scheduled return. Do make certain that you do your absolute best to avoid any delays in boarding the return train," the conductor said, giving my shoulder a slight squeeze, his face unchanging in its expression. "It tends to be a great inconvenience for you or anyone else when having to wait for the following return trip." I hurried to a seat at the table with Phil and Sue, eager to go back home and try to put the voices screaming out of my mind. I was fortunate to at least be at the station when I missed the train. It was unveiling what would have happened had I been caught outside when the chaos erupted. When we arrived back in town, the first thing I did was rush home with Phil. Despite my absence for the entirety of a Saturday, our parents had hardly noticed our absence. The nonchalant attitude of parents in the town. One of the few benefits of small-town living, or just the haze that circulated the apathy held stronger than any faith. The train rests to the east of town, an old steam engine with a stagecoach that hasn't officially ran since the early 1900s. After the logging mill closed and the necessity of transporting workers in and out dried up, the train was parked and left forgotten. The vines and weeds have slowly taken over as pieces of metal were slowly hauled away. Yet many of the town's youth will find their way to the train for the promise of adventure to faraway lands. Many, myself included, are never brave enough to tempt our fate with the cemetery. All who ride spent many failed searches for the sleeping shack only to find sore feet and muddy shoes, with the occasional twig still caught in hair. So we ride the train to nowhere, a pleasant time for all who are willing to pay the price. A secret they hold, scribbled on a piece of paper. The conductor collects these many secrets and feeds them to the driver, fueling our adventures with the lies we tell every day. The greater the secret, the further we can go. I always wonder what secret could be told to reach the end of the line. Would the prize at the end be worth the secret that is needed? I have never seen the driver of the train to nowhere. None who have seen him have returned after being escorted to the engine. Attempting to sneak forward and take a peek has also always failed to yield any results. The conductor is always blocking the path, a red velvet curtain concealing the form of the one controlling the levers. The conductor, always diligent, will escort the curious wanderer back to the stagecoach, saying that the driver cannot be distracted in order for us to make every stop on time. Those who have attempted to sneak a look while the conductor makes his rounds to the back of the train are always collected and brought back before they could peek behind the curtain. Among the riders of the train to nowhere, there are a few popular theories on what is driving the train. All range from the same type of thing the conductor is to a giant slug that feeds on the secrets of the passengers. I personally prefer the later, as the former would be far more terrifying. On a return trip from Russia after a fantastic ball hosted by Catherine the Great, a particularly wild group of riders grew a little too excited and jovial. When Phil and I boarded, Sue hadn't been able to join us for this excursion. The group of rambunctious teens had already been aboard. They were openly and very loudly discussing their rabbling at a speakeasy in Prohibition-era Chicago. The loudest of the group decided to toss one of the now empty mason jars he had in his possession. The jar, which a second earlier or later would have careened wildly out of the open window opposite of them, hit the side of the conductor's face. With an audible crack, the jar bounced off of the conductor's face and smashed onto the ground below. The crack had come from the sound of the porcelain face of the conductor taking such a decisive blow. A large chunk fell to the floor and shattered atop the glass already scattered below. His face still held the same happy smile stretched wide, but beneath the outer shell, the corner of a furious face beneath was easily identifiable. The sound of excitement and laughter was immediately sucked out of the air as the conductor turned to face the group. In an incomprehensible movement of stiffness, the person responsible for the assault was picked up and carried towards the front of the train. There were no words of discourse or discussion, only an empty seat left behind like a falcon picking up a shrew from a field. When the conductor returned, no sign of damage could be seen on his face, and no trace of residue altered his appearance. It was as if a pristine replacement had swapped with the man who had just occupied the place of the conductor. Later, when Sue asked how our trip was, we told her only that the ball was fine, but we could always return at a later point. When Sue and Phil left for college, I thought it would be the last of my trips on the train to nowhere. However, with the monotony of having to work at the family business, I found myself frequenting the train on my off days when I didn't have to help my parents with inventory. With the disappointment of being stuck in a small town with the pressing reality of never leaving, my discontent made for a valuable exchange when paying for my ticket to ride. When in school, the furthest I had gone was probably Rome, Constantinople, or Pompeii. I now found that those places were easily accessible. What became my midweek vacations, I would visit the magnificent wonders of the ancient world. With every ticket I would hand over to the conductor, I would be escorted to the private carriage at the back of the train. The majority of these passengers were all young adults like myself. I don't think I ever saw anyone under 18 waiting to see the more costly sights. While the time I could spend in these places was never as long as the first stop of Egypt, there was an appeal to venturing so far out. There were on a few of these long trips where there would be an individual seeking the end of the line. While they would mention their intent, none were willing to seek it out when I reboarded for the return trip home. A man in his late 20s named Andrew had told me that he had every intention of seeing what waited. He got off at the stop beforehand, unwilling to cross that final threshold. The conductor is always eager for those who wish to travel so far out. He always acts overly courteous to those who wish to see the end and have paid the toll to be able to see it. When they disembark earlier than the end, there is always a tinge of disappointment as he bids them a fine time exploring. The express ticket I received tempts me. The longer I feel the pull of a boring life in a small town, the thought of what could be at the end both intrigues and dissuades me. Plenty of adventurous souls sought immortality in the cemetery and never returned. Was the same true for the train to nowhere as well? Perhaps I should talk with my parents about taking a trip to see Phil and Sue off in college. A chance to put the town and the train out of my mind. Maybe getting out of the town will help clear my mind in a way that the train never could. There was a sound coming from the engine the last time I boarded for the return trip home. A soft gurgling and groaning as metal shifted back and forth. The sounds of faint murmuring whispered the secrets of thousands of untold truths. I began to walk towards the front of the train, the conductor absent from view. As I neared the velvet curtain, I could hear the voice from within calling me to peek behind and see all the truths that were hidden from me. It was as my hand hovered inches from the curtain that the conductor ushered me back to the stagecoach. No malice in his voice, no hint of disapproval. Only the words, "Please don't bother the driver at this time, sir."